Early impressions of the offensive line have been positive for the Seahawks this preseason, but that doesn't mean that John Schneider isn't looking for veteran reinforcements. We're going to break down Dalton Risner's reported visit and why the Seahawks may have interest in the sixth-year blocker coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in, whether you're in nearby Port Angeles, Washington, or listening in from Dickinson, North Dakota. We appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks currently on the road heading to Green Bay. They have a joint practice scheduled tomorrow with the Packers leading up to their final preseason game at Lambeau Field on Saturday. That does not stop the roster shuffle, however. The Seahawks have a big visit coming up free agency-wise with veteran guard Dalton Risner. We're going to be discussing where that may potentially go and why Seattle's looking that direction. We've got a Wednesday mailbag, and then we'll dive into what we're going to be watching when the Seahawks and the Packers take part in their joint practice on Thursday. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. If you've been watching the first two preseason games for the Seahawks, it's safe to say that early impressions of John Benton's offensive line have exceeded expectations. We know it's just the preseason, but still, there's been a lot of positives from that offensive line, opening up room in the run game, protecting quarterbacks. But that doesn't mean that John Schneider isn't always looking for somebody to help that group. And Dalton Risner reportedly going to be visiting the Seahawks. And Risner, Rob, is a six-year veteran. It's actually going to be his seventh season in the NFL. First 4 years in Denver after being a second-round pick. The last 2 years played for the Minnesota Vikings. There's some connections here that we have to make sure that we mention first. Justin Outen, the run game coordinator, he was the Broncos offensive coordinator in 2022. So he's got ties with Dalton Risner. Risner protected both Drew Lock in Denver and Sam Darnold in Minnesota last year. So he's got a relationship with both the top two quarterbacks. And so I think it's interesting. I was a little bit puzzled when the news first dropped yesterday that the Seahawks were going to be bringing him in, because I would think that Risner's looking for a place that he has a chance to start. And right now, with Gray Zabel at left guard and Anthony Bradford playing the way he's playing at right guard, it doesn't seem like there is a starting job that is up for grabs for Risner. Maybe that's the case in the league in general, and that's why he's not signed yet. Maybe now he's just looking for that chance to get onto a roster, and then maybe he can play some snaps down the line. But it really is an interesting free agent visit nonetheless.
Oh, it is. And I think that it's one that makes some sense for the Seahawks when you dig a little bit deeper. Look, as you said, Corbin, anybody who has watched the preseason has seen Seattle's guards, especially the first round selection, Gray Zabel, has been extraordinary. Anthony Bradford is also playing his best football since he was drafted by the Seahawks 3 years ago. I'm really intrigued by Bryce Cable, and Christian Haynes has also shown flashes. That said, you're talking about the most experienced player is Anthony Bradford, who we know has had a roller coaster of an NFL career to this point, and the other players are rookies or second-year players. So I think that the Seahawks basically are just looking to hedge their bets. They know this is going to be a long season, and often rookies and second-year players kind of just struggle. And so why not have a veteran that you can bring in? And if you happen to have a guy who is the number 41 overall pick back in 2019, who has the familiarity with the offense, the familiarity with the quarterbacks, then why not kick the tires on him? I mean, Dalton Risner is a good player when he is healthy. He has struggled with elbow and back injuries at times over his career. He signed with the Minnesota Vikings a couple of years ago for just $1.2 million for his base salary, and then he had another $500,000 basically in how many games he was active active and participating. So again, this isn't going to be a move that's going to break the bank from a Seahawks perspective. I think that they're kicking the tires on a veteran player that would give the Seahawks that much more reliability, consistency at the interior offensive line position. But I don't think that they are desperate at this point. I think that they are very excited about what they already have in the fold. And again, want to just make sure that they are doing their due diligence.
There's two things that really stand out to me now that I've had a chance to consider the depth chart and just looking at where the Seahawks are at right now. This interest tells me two things, and well, actually three. The first is this could just be the cursory John Schneider, just making sure no stone is left unturned. You had Cincinnati already had a visit with him, and that probably would be the best chance for him to get on the field early, if we're being honest, because they've got injuries. Cordell Volson now out for the season in Cincinnati, so that might end up being where he circles the wagon and goes back to. But I think you have to consider with the situation in Seattle in terms of their youth, as you mentioned, that's the first thing that jumped out to me. They don't have that veteran that can come in and really lead this interior offensive line. The most experienced players they have up there are Oluwatimi and Anthony Bradford. And it's not like those guys have played a ton of snaps in the league. So having that veteran mentor that can play both guard spots, which Risner is very capable of doing, that is a major feather in the cap for the Seahawks offensive line if you could add somebody like that to the equation. But I think this speaks more to the depth and some concerns that the Seahawks have behind the two starters they have. Maybe they're looking for somebody that can really push Anthony Bradford and make sure that he stays playing his best. But I'm looking at it more from a second and third level perspective because, Rob, you look at where things stand, and this is just based on the last week and a half of practices. Bryce Cabledew is now the second string left guard. Satawa Lamea has dropped down to third. Christian Haynes is the second string right guard, but he was with the third team for a while before jumping back into that position. I'm wondering if the Seahawks have reached a point here where one or both of those draft picks from a year ago, especially with a new coaching staff that didn't pick those players, I'm wondering if the Seahawks have reached a critical juncture with those two, particularly with Satawa Lamea, who we've talked about. Neither one of us had him making our 53 on yesterday's projection. But Christian Haynes, you've had him for 2 years, and he's had opportunity after opportunity, and he cannot get into the lineup. He has not been able to seize that chance. So do you call somebody like the Cincinnati Bengals and see if you can get a mid-day 3 pick for Christian Haynes? I'm wondering if the Seahawks are looking into doing something like that and then signing Dalton Risner and having him be your swing guard that can play both spots behind Zabel and Anthony Bradford and bring that veteran mentor presence. I don't know if they're ready to give up on Haynes just yet, but this was something that crossed my mind when the Risner free agent visit news came out. That might be where the Seahawks are at this point, especially with some of the visible frustration we've seen from John Benton with a couple of these guys.
Yeah, no question about it. I think that's exactly what John Schneider and the Seahawks are thinking as well. Is that what the heck? If the light hasn't turned on for Christian Haynes at this point, then will it? As you said, I mean the current coaching staff, of course, was not at least on the offensive line and the running game and the offensive coordinator. They were not the ones who selected Christian Haynes, specifically. And Satawa Lamea, to me, he is an interesting guy because of his tackle guard versatility. I think that's one of the reasons why he still has a chance of making this roster. But I think in terms of just your plug and play kind of guards, I feel like Satawa Lamea is not been as impressive this year as he was last year. And frankly, I didn't think that he was that impressive last year. But I just think that he was the best that you had at that point. Christian Haynes to me is the maddening one. And the reason why I think this is a conversation, because, I see flashes of Christian Haynes where he can be dominant. But I even wrote in his scouting report when he's coming out of UConn a couple of years ago that he almost has a little bit more WWE kind of wrestler to him than he does like a technically sound football player, which is unusual for a guy who's All-American position and a 4-year starter. But he is a guy that is a little bit of a brawler. And so he just seems to enjoy the physical, style of football, but doesn't always finish his blocks. And that was one of the things that people were concerned about with Anthony Bradford as well. We've seen Anthony Bradford kind of take that next step. I still remain hopeful that Christian Haynes is going to be able to take that next step. But clearly the Seahawks are frustrated because of the fact that they've been moving him to not only right guard, where he played at UConn, but to left guard and then at center, as we've talked about. So I think that this is more a move of the Seahawks looking for a quality veteran that they feel like could be a reliable backup and somebody who might be able to push the young players already on the roster.
To me, it's a trust and confidence thing. If they're seriously looking into this, because if we were having this conversation at this time last year, Rob, which actually I think we did because Risner was a free agent fairly deep into the process last year, he was a name we were throwing around. Maybe Seattle brings him in to compete for a starting job. I think at this point that wouldn't be the case. He'd be there to push the guys that are starting in Zabel and Bradford, but it does scream to me that the coaching staff, the front office, collectively, that they've got some doubts about Christian Haynes and Satawa Lamea. I wouldn't say that about Cable Dew because he's a rookie. I think the Seahawks hope to get him on their practice squad. If he's not on the roster, as you mentioned, he might be somebody that they think they can't sneak to the practice squad. So there's a lot of different moving parts here, but I am wondering, I've wondered a lot about this since that report came out. What does this say about where the Seahawks stand, particularly with Christian Haynes? And to me, it does not look good for him if the Seahawks are trying to add somebody like Dalton Risner to the roster. And so that's going to create some interesting decisions for Seattle. If especially they decide to go this route and they sign him, that's one less roster spot available for the rest of the guards. Could make Christian Haynes and Satawa Lamea expendable. When we come back, we've got a mailbag. We're going to be diving into your questions, our valued listeners. We'll get to those up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. Fire up the group chat. Get your draft board ready and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, Rob, Nick, and I are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. Whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, I've used Yahoo Fantasy for years and love how smooth the draft day experience is. Our Locked On League's been running through Yahoo for a while now. They offer easy setup. There's a great mobile app, and the smack talk just hits different in the message boards. I can remember just how much fun it was to rub in everybody's faces when the Crybaby Cutlers won the championship many years ago. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. And to kick it off, Yahoo Fantasy just dropped Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's been a while. It's time to open up the mailbag, and we've got a ton of awesome questions from you, our valued listeners. So let's get to them here. And Rob, I know you're excited about this first question. Coming from Elo Tato on X, if the Seahawks were to trade for an edge DT player, how would you feel with the following names? Harrison Phillips, Zach Pickens, DJ Davidson, David Ojabo, and Sam Williams. A number of guys there, Rob, that have some ties to the Seahawks coaching staff, particularly Aden Durde.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually where I was going to kind of go. Is of the names there, the one I would be most intrigued by is Sam Williams. I just think that he has not yet, maximized his potential. I mean, I was so excited about him coming out of college. Aden Durde, of course, is going to be very familiar with him in their time with the Dallas Cowboys. I was in Oxnard, California, where the Cowboys hold their training camp this summer. And I see Sam Williams is still having that physical upside. And even with Mike Micah Parsons not being on the field for the Cowboys. Obviously, DeMarcus Lawrence is not with the Cowboys anymore. Sam Williams still wasn't getting the first team reps that I was expecting to see from him. So I do think that he is one of those guys that you could kind of buy low and still have reasonable expectations that he might be able to pop. And so to me, he is the most intriguing one there. As far as outside pass rushers, I don't think the outside pass rusher is as big of a concern for this club, just because, again, I think that this is a team that, while they may not have a true alpha on the outside, I think that the alpha is Leonard Williams on the inside. And I think that that's something that Mike Macdonald kind of wants. He wants to have waves of pass rushers, not just one guy, because if that one guy goes down, then of course, then you're kind of struggling. And so I don't know that this is a huge priority for Seattle. I do think that maybe one of those interior players, like a Pickens, for example, might also be something that would be in play for Seattle. But my personal favorite in terms of how much bang you get for your buck would be Sam Williams.
Our next question coming from Josh DeHuman on X. This is the ultimate John Schneider question here. Could we send Haynes to Cincinnati for a draft pick, Marquez Valdes-Scantling to Minnesota for a draft pick, and then try to trade for an elite pass rusher with Mafe or Hall in the package, and then sign Risner to have a vet presence on the O-line and back up Bradford? Well, it sounds to me like John Schneider would be throwing a party if he was able to make all of that happen. Look, I think in terms of realism, we just talked about this. I think Christian Haynes getting traded, I actually say right now that I think that's more likely to happen than not, because I do think this is a league where there's a lot of scarcity on the offensive line. John Schneider's talked about it. And Christian Haynes is still young. He's entering the second year of his rookie contract. You have 3 years of club control with him. Former All-American. If he's not working out in Seattle, there will be other teams. And Cincinnati, like right now, Cincinnati's just looking for any big guy that can put pads on. But with the injuries they've got in the offensive line. So I think you could call Cincinnati. And I'm going to throw something out there. Maybe Christian Haynes is part of the deal to get Trey Hendrickson to Seattle. Why not? I mean, and Cincinnati could look at that. Hey, we're getting a young player. It's a major area of need. I think a package where you included Boye Mafe and Christian Haynes in a third-round pick, I'm signing off for that tomorrow to get Trey Hendrickson. So why not? Now, as for Valdes-Scantling, I still need to see it to believe it in terms of Seattle being able to trade him because of the $3 million in guarantees. I think teams are going to be looking for him to get cut and then pluck him. But there are other teams. San Francisco is desperate for receivers. I don't know if Seattle's going to trade him in division, but San Francisco's being linked to receivers. There's been talk about Minnesota, obviously a couple other teams that are looking for veteran receiver help. If there's that many teams that are looking for it, Seattle might be able to find a taker, and Minnesota's offense has some similarities to what Clint Kubiak is running. So Valdes-Scantling might be somebody that's appealing to them. So I think those kind of trades are the ones that are most likely to happen. Trey Hendrickson, probably not. Although, like I just said, if I'm John Schneider, I think I have a really good plan in place to give them and if they want Jarek Reed as a cherry on top to add to their secondary depth, I mean, I could float 3 players and a draft pick and try to get Trey Hendrickson. I think that's a lot more realistic than Micah Parsons, but we'll leave it at that. So I think that John Schneider would be happy to see a number of these things happen. Risner would obviously come in if you traded Haynes. You have to do that. But I think that John Schneider would be happy with a number of these moves happening here. Our next question for Rob from Dangeros08 on X. How would you rank your early impressions of this draft class at the same point of time compared to other John Schneider classes that you have covered?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this draft class. I mean, I said it when the Seahawks finished it. I gave it the A on foxsports.com, and I feel just as strongly about it now as I did then. I mean, in fact, I actually might feel even stronger about it just because of the quality and quantity of Seattle's undrafted free agent class. Look, it's putting the cart way in front of the horse to kind of compare it to some of those elite classes, you know, the 2012s and 2013s. that wound up becoming, before that, they wound up becoming the backbones of those Super Bowl runs. But at the same time, it does have that kind of a feel to it because it's very much checking off the box as far as fulfilling some of the biggest areas of concern for this club, the athletic ability, the durability, and just the sheer want to, the professionalism in these guys. You're not gambling on young athletes. You're gambling on guys that, like in Elijah Arroyo, for example, to me is one of the wild cards. Jalen Milroe is one of the wild cards. But everything that you talk with Jalen Milroe, they all kind of just brag about these young men's work ethic and dedication. And so to me, this is the draft class. I think that is going to kind of restart the conversation of John Schneider being one of the NFL's most astute talent evaluators and one of the league's preeminent general managers.
Good question here coming from Brian Schoenleb, one on X. With all the talk of making a splashy trade for a defensive end, what are the big forthcoming extensions that might get in the way of that? So I've talked about this a lot in the show. Seattle has positioned themselves where John Schneider doesn't have to think about, oh man, this might hurt me signing 3 or 4 guys or whatever if I go out and trade for Trey Hendrickson. They've got tons of financial flexibility. John Schneider's positioned Seattle to do that. If there is one contract, though, that could kind of muddy the picture here when you're looking from a multiple year perspective, to me, it's Riq Woolen, because as good as he has been at times, I don't know that I'm wanting to pay more than $15 million per year. And there's going to be teams that will probably choke up 20, 25 million. I mean, they're going to be, or cough up, excuse me. They're going to be coughing up a lot of money for a guy that's got the physical tools that he has, the production that he already has, interceptions, pass breakups, and just knowing that there's still an incredibly high ceiling to reach with this player. But that would be the one that I would say that, I have the most, I'd say most reservation in terms of the amount of money it might cost, because I also have to pay Devin Witherspoon the next year. Do you want to have 2 high-priced corners on your roster? Seattle's done that before. They've paid multiple defensive backs big money, and they had a ton of success doing that. But you have to consider, is Riq Woolen going to be worth that price point? So if he's 20+ million per year, and then you're wanting to re-sign Witherspoon, that is where things start to get a little bit tougher. Like, okay, if I'm signing both those guys, can I afford to have a Trey Hendrickson or a Micah Parsons on my roster? So I think Riq Woolen would probably be the biggest wild card, the biggest wrench when you're looking at something that might stop Seattle from being able to make a splashy deal for one of these star pass rushers that appears to be available right now. Rob, fun question here from Unfettered Zen on X. How is the buzz and scouting reports on Milroe's strengths and weaknesses thus far compared to what we saw from Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson pre and post draft? And where does that lead our expectations for the future with Milroe?
I think that your expectation should be sky high for Jalen Milroe. I think that, but that's long term. I think your expectations for this year should be similar to what we saw in the last preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs, when Sam Darnold, of course, started the game, but then there was a short yardage situation, and similar to how the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, with the tush push or the brotherly shove. I mean, I think we saw the start of what I'm going to call the Seattle scrum, in the way that they used Jalen Milroe, put him under center, and had the backs behind him, push him forward in that brotherly shove type of a way. And I just think that Jalen Milroe's upside as a runner, to me, is going to make this not so much just a short yardage type of situation, but somebody that can break through the line of scrimmage and just, gallop for 90 yards. So I think that Milroe's upside is phenomenal. At the same time, there's a reason why he was a 3rd round pick and why Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, MVP players at this point, were 1st round selections. So to me, that's the thing, is the expectation is very, very high. At the same time, I think that you have to be patient. This is Sam Darnold's club. I think if there's any type of an injury, it's going to be Drew Lock's club. Jalen Milroe, you can see the limitations of where he is in terms of his accuracy at this point, but just give him a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, and I think that you could have a top end starter in the future in Milroe.
Fun question here from Mike C. from NJ on X. Amari Kite has played ahead of Mike Jarrell at both tackle spots in both preseason games. Why do both of you have Jarrell making the 53 over him? That's a really good question. Now, I'm going to explain my answer here. I've been at every training camp practice up until this week, and Mike Jarrell has been the one that has been getting the vast majority of the reps with the second team offense. I think sometimes you have to look at the entire picture, and when Jarrell has been in the lineup, he has looked pretty good in the preseason games. Kite has as well. I just think when you're looking at physical tools, Mike Jarrell is way more athletic than Amari Kite is. It's night and day difference. And Jarrell is now playing both sides of the line, which Kite had already done at the college level. This is new for Mike Jarrell, playing both right and left tackle. But from what I've seen, he has taken that step forward. So to me, it's also about who can you get through to the practice squad too. I think you have a much better chance of getting Amari Kite to the practice squad with his athletic limitations compared to a 90th percentile athlete in Mike Jarrell, who's already making progress. I think you'd have a hard time slipping him through the waiver wire. So those are my rationale. Those are my reasons. Rob, I'll let you real quick explain yourself here too.
Well, I struggle with this one. I mean, Amari Kite was my highest rated offensive player, not the running backs, the highest rated offensive player to not make my initial 53. And I'm still struggling with that. I am fascinated to see how Seattle's entire offensive line goes up against the Green Bay Packers defensive line, not only in the preseason game, which of course we'll all be able to watch, but the joint practice. That's where I'm going to be kind of reaching out to sources on Seattle's coaching and scouting staff to see the way that Amari Kite was able to handle the barrage of different styles of players that the Packers are going to unleash on him. But Amari Kite is a guy I am very, very high on and think that it would be a roll of the dice if Seattle was to try and get him through waivers. I'm not so sure that he wouldn't get plucked up by another club.
When we come back, you mentioned joint practices in Green Bay. It's happening tomorrow against the Packers. What are we going to be watching and hoping to hear coming out of Green Bay? We'll get to that up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to the ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where GameTime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. GameTime makes it possible. GameTime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices in the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. GameTime is the official ticketing partner of Locked On NFL, making it easy to browse the app for preseason games and season openers in week 1. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to the GameTime by downloading the GameTime app, creating an account, and using the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, make sure to go tune in to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. The Seahawks going to be wrapping up their preseason with a road trip to Lambeau Field to face the Packers. And while everybody's going to be paying close attention to the actual game on Saturday, that final audition, you're probably not going to be seeing many, if any, starters in that game, Rob, because the Seahawks are going to have a joint practice tomorrow with the Green Bay Packers. That is where the starters are going to test their mettle. And this is a team that I'm really excited to see the Seahawks get a chance to spar against in Green Bay, because the Packers are kind of one of those teams that is hovering in the peripheral where if everything falls right, I could absolutely see them being a team that's hanging around deep into the postseason in January in the NFC. They got to get through that division first, which is going to be incredibly difficult. But Green Bay's got a lot of really good players. They're well coached. They are a physical football team. And I think you got to start this discussion in terms of what you can get out of joint practices. Offensive line for the Seattle Seahawks. That has been a big talking point. It was a lot of negatives coming out of the offseason. Did they do enough? Not enough changes. Fans have been excited. Analysts have been excited about what we've seen here in these first couple preseason games. But this is the real litmus test. It isn't those preseason contests. Green Bay with Kenny Clark and a number of other really solid interior defensive linemen. They've got physical edges like Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness. they've got all these different pieces. This is a chance for John Benton and Mike McDonald, everybody involved in Seattle's coaching staff, to get that real glimpse of where are we at right now as an offensive line going against a really physical Packers defensive line that's got a lot of depth and a lot of different types of weapons they can throw at you up front.
Yeah, I think to start the conversation is just what is the value of the joint practices, and to me, it's the value is obvious. The competition that you're going to be able to create, just the level of intensity that it's going to spark, and then you can control the situations. If the Seahawks want to focus specifically on red zone offense or red zone defense, for example, then they can do that. If there is any type of a skirmish, and there often are those types of things, then you can, shut things down without the risk of there being a fight that's going to result in an ejection and an NFL player earning some type of, of suspension or discipline from the NFL, at least not nearly as likely. And I mention those because I actually was fortunate enough to go to a couple of different joint practices just this summer. The Dallas Cowboys in Oxnard, California hosted the Los Angeles Rams before their preseason game. The San Francisco 49ers hosted the Denver Broncos before their preseason games. And in both cases, Corbin, it was interesting that the visiting teams actually really played very, very well. And so, again, I think that that bodes well for the Seahawks, who, of course, are playing really good football right now. But the individual matchups, as you talked about, along the offensive line, to me, that is one of the fascinating things about this. How does this young offensive line for the Seahawks, specifically Jalen Sundell, Gray Zabel, Anthony Bradford, how do they do it against a Kenny Clark, a Nazir Stackhouse, Devontae White? I mean, those are some big, strong, proven NFL players. How do the tackles, especially a guy like an Amari Kite or a Mike Jarrell, how are they able to go up against a Rashawn Gary or a Lucas Van Ness or any of the other Packer edge rushers that they have? Because th've got some guys who are in that 6'4", 280-pound range, and then they've got some guys who are much, much smaller and quicker than that. And so, of course, the Seahawks have a pretty exciting defensive front themselves, but you kind of get used to the same guys. Their tricks. It's going to be interesting to see how Seattle performs in that. And quickly, I also want to make sure that I mention my individual matchups that I'm most excited about. It's not along the offensive and defensive lines I just talked about. To me, where I think is the most congested for Seattle's depth chart right now, the actual job still on the line, I think it's in Seattle's secondary, the cornerback and safeties. And while it's not likely you're going to see Jordan Love at the quarterback position for the Packers, he's struggling with an injury. At the same time, you got a quarterback in Green Bay and Malik Willis, who, again, gives you some dual threat kind of possibilities. Sean Clifford is more their number 3 quarterback at this point. Taylor Eldrum as well is a little bit more of that traditional drop back and throw the ball over the field. So you're going to get some different looks. And so I'm looking at, Nehemiah Pritchett, I think, is clearly on this team. But then Demarion Williams, Tyler Hall, Shamar Jean Charles, the rookie free agent Isis Waxter. How do they perform against the Green Bay Packers receiving core, Corbin, that some are arguing it might just be the most talented in all of the NFL? Now, they don't have Christian Watson. He's coming off of the injury, but their first round pick, the very first wide receiver selected this year, the fastest guy in the 2025 NFL draft, Matthew Golden. How does he perform? How does a guy, a proven veteran like a Romeo Dobbs? Again, the Packers are so diverse at the receiver position that I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup for Seattle's defensive backs.
And I'm looking at the safeties and linebackers going up against Green Bay's tight ends. I think that Tucker Kraft is a borderline top 5 talent at the tight end position. Musgrave is a player, if he can stay healthy. The injuries have been his biggest issue dating back to when he was at Oregon State. If he can stay healthy, he's a very athletic tight end that can do damage in the passing game. I want to see Nick Emanwari going up against those guys because he's going to be playing a lot in the box with the current setup when they're doing 3 safety looks. He's going to be up there playing like an extra linebacker. And right now they kind of need that with Tyrese Knight not being available yet. He's going to get a lot of snaps in the box. He's going to be playing in the slot. And a lot of those matchups are going to be against Green Bay's tight ends. Maybe he ends up against some of the quicker receivers, somebody like a Jaden Reed that can play inside. But he is going to get tested. And this is that real litmus test. You haven't seen it in the preseason yet, but a chance to see how does Nick Emanwari hold up against starter caliber players from another really good football team. And you could say that about the linebackers that are going to get experience here. Drake Thomas, Patrick O'Connell, you're going to get a lot of good reps against talented players from the Green Bay Packers. And so I'm looking at those positions. Safety, you could maybe say DeAnthony Bell is going to get some of those reps too, but you're looking at where everybody fits in terms of the linebacker and safety pecking order, how you're going to be utilizing somebody like a Nick Emanwari. Going against this type of competition is going to paint a much clearer picture than what you've gotten from the first 2 preseason games, and you get a lot of really good reps. I want to finish up, and this is always what I say with joint practices. I think the nice thing, and this is one of the advantages of a joint practice, you have the ability to dictate when plays are over with. You can blow the whistle earlier. You can play thud instead of tackling to the ground. You can do a lot of things to try to avoid injuries while still getting really good reps against another good football team. That's the key to me. Seattle, get back from Green Bay without any significant injuries. Get out of this joint practice healthy, get those good reps, but healthy. Then, hopefully your guys that are playing on Saturday, you don't have any injuries either. But the joint practice, that's the key. Can we get all these good reps and make sure that we have a little bit more of the thumb down on everything, where we can get a quicker whistle and we can try to make sure that none of the extracurriculars happen, that we can avoid the injuries, guys not being taken to the ground. To me, Rob, that is the biggest key with these joint practices. You just got to keep everybody healthy, bring them back to the Pacific Northwest in good shape so that you can start getting ready for week 1 against the 49ers.
Oh, no question about it. Remaining healthy, obviously, is going to be the priority. But I also think that you want to send a message. This is the Green Bay Packers squad that has thumped you the last couple of times. And I think there's a lot of Super Bowl talk with Green Bay. There's not a lot, at least outside maybe of this program out there about the Seahawks. I think you have to send a message. I thought that was the case, in the first preseason game against the visiting Raiders, and then certainly against the Kansas City Chiefs in Seattle. I thought basically checked those boxes. I think the same thing applies here. Now you're on the road. And so does Mike McDonald have the leaders on this team to be able to kind of rise up to the challenge? Because, the cheeseheads are going to be there strong.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be riding solo, going to be dishing out some thoughts from what's coming out of Green Bay in Seattle's joint practices. Again, hopefully no injuries that we have to talk about, but we'll be diving into some takeaways coming out of that joint practice and start previewing for the game on Saturday. Keys to victory, things of that nature. Who's going to be the players under the microscope? We'll have all that coming up on tomorrow's show. So make sure that you listen in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.